Hi guys, what's going on? And welcome back to an episode of Conqueror's Blade. So I just very quickly wanted to run through some of the better starting units. It's kind of a question that seems to crop up quite often in the comments, particularly as new players end up coming sort of through to the game, particularly after it's been released a while and some of this information isn't quite so readily sort of kind of on the top of the pile anymore. I kind of just wanted to touch on what are some of the better units you should probably be shooting for within your sort of first couple of weeks of gameplay. So when you load in, obviously you will get things like serfs, tenant farmers, village watchmen, etc. and woodcutters, none of which are particularly amazing, but out of the starting peasant units, the woodcutters are actually a pretty decent unit. They only cost 40 leadership to take into a battle. They come out with a decent strength unit, and they have a pretty reasonable upgrade tree. Personally, I would be inclined to go along the top tree. This gives them sort of the damage increases. That, for me, is probably the better branch to be going down. And yeah, they're actually a reasonable unit. They're not as bad as they might initially seem. So that's kind of it for the peasants, really. The others, particularly things like the village watchmen or the tenant farmers, horrible units. Don't even think about them. Beyond that, as you start to get into the feudal and chivalric eras, what are you going to be looking at? Pike militia are honestly one of the best units, tier for tier, that you can get in the game. I still use them now. They're one of my go-to units. I have them elited. I take them into every battle with me. Get Pike militia. I know bang about this on quite a lot. I've done a video on them. Go check that out if you want to kind of see a little bit more about their gameplay. They are an excellent unit. Get them. You're going to be going for the middle veterancy branch because it gives you the stun. Bracing stuns enemy units, and you also get the +1 attack, so it means you do a lot of damage to a lot of enemies, and you can really deal with much higher tier units with these guys, particularly with that stun if you use them properly. Excellent unit. So moving on down, kind of what else do we like sort of on this sort of side of things? Iron Cap Swordsmen. They're a decent unit. It's a dead-end tech tree, so that kind of tends to put a lot of people off. And that's kind of understandable. In the grand scheme of things, the amount of honour you're going to be using to get to these guys, it isn't that high. If you're looking for a decent sword unit, Iron Cap Swordsmen do the job quite nicely, and it's all about the charge. They get some quite nice charge bonuses, so you're going to be going for the top branch. You can see charge damage 10%, increased charge damage 15%, charging stuns, charge cooldown reduction, charge damage 20%. You can see it all stacks into that charge increase, and it means that they end up with really quite an effective charge. They're never going to be the most amazing sustained melee unit, but for that charge, that initial charge they get charging into the enemy units, you can really start to rival some higher tier units like squires and stuff like that for the charge. So yeah, for 150 leadership for a chivalric era unit, I quite like the Iron Cap Swordsman. Not a unit I don't make enough use of, but certainly one that most people are going to be checking out. Thinking long term, Prefecture Guards, again, are also quite a nice unit, but that's kind of pushing on a little bit further down the line as we start getting into the Silver Era stuff. So then we have things like the Spear Militia. It's a bit of a strange one in a way, whether we like these or not. For me, in a way, they're better than the Iron Cap Spearmen, but I wonder realistically how useful are they in kind of the current game sort of meta. You're largely going to be coming up against higher tier people. Me personally, I'm not really worried if I see a Spear Militia. They're not really a threat to me, not in a way that something like a Pike Militia or a charge for an Iron Cap can be. They're not the fastest unit. Yes, they do have a nice line formation, which does cause a bit of a block, and it will delay people a bit, but it's not super effective. You know, when they get fully upgraded, they can be good, but I'm not sure it's a unit I personally would be shooting for out of the gates. I mean, compare them to the Iron Caps. I think tier for tier, they're much better than the Iron Caps, although, you know, the Imperial Spearguard is actually really quite nice. So it's a line that eventually is worth going down. But for me, I think it's hard to do super well with the fact that most people have moved on from these low-end spear units now. And when it's all about defense, which is what this unit is, I think they kind of struggle. I think a lot of people may end up disagreeing with me about that, though, because I know some people still really like the Spear Militia. So kind of 6 and 2 4s with them. If you really want a spear wall, then it's worth going for. I wouldn't bother pushing onto the Iron Caps until you're sort of ready to push through to the Imperial Spearguards. Javelins, not something I've touched on yet, really, personally. I played them back in closed beta. They can be decent, but I'm not a tremendous fan of them, so I'm not something I've really pushed into. So, archers. Now, there's basically two or three distinct lines. There's the Western Archer line, the Western Crossbow line, and the Eastern Archer line. So, for me, I would be going down the Eastern line. I've kind of done both. I've not tried the fire archers yet. They're a particularly nice unit that most people seem to do really well with, but it's all about prefetchers, really, at the moment. In my opinion, they're the best unit in the game. They were supposed to be nerfed in the last patch. It didn't really plan out quite as well as a nerf as I think perhaps people expected it to be, and they're still really powerful. Now, whether that's going to get sorted out and they're going to see another nerf at some point in the future, I don't know. But prefecture archers are one of the best, or one of the silver era units that has just an immense amount of potential. They can do so much damage so quickly, just insanity. So I love my prefecture archers. But if we're talking about the lower tier stuff, is your sort of a starting player, then the Iron Cap archers can actually be sort of a miniature version of them. If we actually go into them and take a look at their veterancy line, you see you're going to want to be going down the bottom line because it unlocks an arrow rain, Bring the Storm, which is sort of the ability which makes prefectures so good. Once you get them like this, while they don't have the fire rate or they don't quite have the damage of prefectures, it actually makes them really quite a nice little unit. Certainly one worth unlocking and leveling, and yeah, for a Chivalric era unit, it's pretty easy to get to, not too much honour to get this far down the line. Certainly that's the archer I would be going for. I'd certainly be taking them over domain archers. Crossbows, again, can be okay. The domain arbalists are in a pretty decent place right now, but they are a silver era unit, so you've got a little bit of grinding to get down there. Then we kind of moved on to the musket lines. The western musket lines with the Creed's Rats and the Tercios are undergoing quite a few balance changes at the moment. At the moment, Tercios aren't really that great. In the future, whether that's going to change, I don't know. So that kind of means that this is a bit of a line in question for me at the moment. And it doesn't start until the Silver era. So you've got to be spending quite a lot of honour to get down here. 7,500 just to unlock them. Plus you've got a little bit to unlock with the tactical formations there as well. Iron Caps are a unit, in my opinion, worth getting. Chivalric era unit, 2.5-star unit, pretty cheap on the honour front, little upfront cost in terms of what you need, and they make for just a really nice, quite inaccurate, but high damaging musket unit. And if you want to kind of give the musketries a bit of a try, Iron Cap arquebusiers, you really aren't going to go too far wrong. Cavalry, we're almost there, getting through this now. Then it's basically 3 starting choices. Iron Cap bow riders, yes, they do have the moments. No, don't go for them as your first cavalry unit. You've basically got a choice between the Courtiers and the Iron Cap Scout Cavalry. These are a Lance Cavalry. Start with a charge. Quite a nice little cavalry unit. I don't think they get enough credit sometimes. They do a decent amount of charge damage, and yeah, nice little unit. Decent all-round unit, and leads on to some of the nice things like the Winged Hussars and stuff like that. Iron Cap Scout Cavalry, a little bit harder from the off because they don't come with a charge. You don't get a charge until level 7. But once you get that charge, plus if you can start to apply speed bonuses to them and stuff like that, you can actually get them to be really quite an effective unit for their tier. And can take on much higher tier units, particularly if they get off a nice sort of charge or a nice run through. And the units can do quite a lot of damage. So again, also quite a nice unit. And again, leading on to some pretty decent stuff like the Prefecture Heavy Cavalry, as well as kind of the Fire Lancers. So finally, is all we've got is the Chivalric units. The only thing here you're really going to be wanting to look at from the off, well, obviously the only thing you can really be looking off from the off is these Domain Spearmen. They're okay. I don't get why people like them. I'm not a huge fan. I find them to be a relatively mediocre unit. Again, I feel they don't really fulfill either role that well. Their damage is okay, but not great. Their defense is okay, but not great. And while they do give you sort of good numbers in the unit, and if you start to push down some of the veterancy lines, they do okay. Personally, I feel they're an overrated unit at 2.5 stars. And I'm not a huge fan of them. I do kind of quite like their Spear Sergeant brethren a little bit further down. This kind of a weird unit which ends up fitting between the Silver and Heroic area. Are much nicer, although I don't think they rival Imperial Spear Guards yet. But for me, Domain Spearmen, yes, they're a reasonable unit. They are a cheap spear unit, and they do the job acceptably. But I'm not a massive fan of them for the tier. I'll be taking my Pike militia over these guys any day of the week, and I'll probably be taking my Iron Cap swordsman as well. Anyway, hopefully that's given you kind of just a little bit of an overview of my personal feelings on some of these lower tier units. Obviously, some people are going to disagree, and as well as the way things change in the patches, we could see things sort of end up a little bit differently as well going forward. So it's kind of always up for a little bit of change. Anyway, hopefully that was interesting and vaguely useful. If it was, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. subscribe to the channel for a load more Conqueror's Blade content, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.